Let's get to the breaking news now. America remembering our 41st president as the body of President George H.W. Bush is being flown to Washington, D.C. right now aboard Air Force One. We go outnumbered overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. The final trip to Washington, the casket carrying President George H.W. Bush, is headed to the nation's capital after a departure ceremony involving his family in Houston, Texas. You saw it here live on Fox. His remains will lie in state at the Capitol Rotunda, beginning later today, allowing a final farewell from the American public before a state funeral at the National Cathedral on Wednesday. His son, President George W. Bush, on his father's life.
The mission was not George H.W. Bush. The mission was, how do we serve the United States? The office is more important than man. It's really one of the most important things for Americans to understand. Dad taught me this. And therefore, one of the jobs is to strengthen the institution of the presidency, bring honor to the office. And that, clearly, George H.W. Bush did. I think he's going to go down as the greatest one-term president ever.
Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel, live for us from Capitol Hill. A big week.
No question about it, Harris. Good afternoon to you. Soon the scene shifts to Washington and later today to Capitol Hill. The body of former President George Herbert Walker Bush and his family are currently at this hour flying to Washington aboard what's being described as Special Air Mission 41. Later today, much of official Washington and then the general public will salute the 41st president for his lifetime of service to this country. His former political rival, President Bill Clinton, talked about the tremendous bond between them.
It's been one of the great joys of my life, my friendship with him. Our arguments were good-natured and open, and we continue to debate things all the way up until recently.
President Trump will attend Wednesday's funeral at the National Cathedral. Despite differences between the Bush family and the 45th president, Mr. Bush wanted Mr. Trump at his funeral. President Trump praised Bush 41 over the weekend for his sound judgment, common sense, and unflappable leadership. The 44th president, a Democrat, praised President Bush for his skill in foreign policy.
You have chaos, potentially, in the former Soviet Union and Russia, and uncertainty in Europe. All those things could have gone haywire at any point. And the restraint, the caution, the lack of spiking the football that they showed was, I think, an enormous achievement.
Fox News has confirmed former President George W. Bush, former Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, former Wyoming Senator Alan Simpson, and presidential historian John Meacham will eulogize the 41st president during Wednesday's funeral service at the National Cathedral, all part of America saying goodbye to the final president from the greatest generation era. Harris?
Mike Emanuel, thank you very much. My first guest says he's lost a hero and his North Star. Walker Stapleton, a cousin of George Herbert Walker Bush, is Colorado's state treasurer and was the GOP nominee for governor this fall. Great to see you. You know, I have a list of touch points, but I want to start with this. The former president had wanted to spend one last summer in Maine, and you were with him.
Well, I did get a chance to spend some time with him in June in the midst of a pretty hectic campaign schedule myself, but he was determined to get to Maine. He wanted to get to Maine as soon as possible last summer. Maine is really his anchor. It's his family spot where all the folks generationally that love him are able to gather around him and provide him strength, and he loves the sea air, and he wanted to be with family, I think, one last time, and he was determined that he was going to get there, and he got there, and he was able to spend one last great summer with the family in Maine.
Was there a message or a resounding series of words that he was sharing with people on this final summer in Maine?
Well, he's somebody that I had the privilege of knowing through 44 years of life. Really, I have a letter that on the wall, on my son's wall, that he wrote to my parents the day after I was born, and his kindness was something that all of us in his family were the beneficiaries of. And as he got older, because of his Parkinson's, he wasn't able to speak in long sentences, and so he became an even better listener than he was already a really good listener. He became an even better one, and he imparted words of wisdom to me about being yourself, be true to yourself, treat people with dignity and respect. He was the kindest individual I'll ever know in this life, and he carried himself with a selflessness that I think is rarely seen amongst people who have achieved so much. And I will treasure the times that I spent with him, and they always ended with "I love you," and he would say, "I love you back," or "I love you too." And that's what he was about at the end of his life. He was all about love for his family, love for his God. He was a man of faith his entire life, and he could actually had an amazing ability to be having a really important foreign policy discussion with a world leader in one room and a family barbecue out on the back deck, and he could transition between very important matters of state and discussing what happened in the Red Sox game the night before.
Some of the pictures that we're seeing on the left-hand side you have provided for us today to share with our audience, and many of them are younger versions of you, although you're very young already, Walker. But some of them
much
are
younger.
much younger versions of you. And I just wonder, you know, of course pictures capture us in those moments normally when we're smiling, but what made your cousin laugh?
Oh, so he had an amazing sense of humor. He did all sorts of irreverent things that would crack people up. And, you know, I think as people get older, one of the biggest fears is, will your kids want to be around you? Will your grandkids want to be around you? I can tell you that his kids and grandkids wanted to be around him every moment. But it wasn't just them. It was his nieces and his nephews and his cousins and his extended family, because he made time for all of us. I am so fortunate and blessed to have dozens of his letters involving a kid bullying me in grade school when I graduated from college. He had such care for the individuals in his family and really for people outside of his family. There were the important letters that you've talked about that he left for President Clinton, but there were also the letters that he sent to somebody who pressed his suit, or somebody that nobody else paid attention to, or somebody that waited on his table. That's the type of person that George Bush 41 was. He was a voracious letter writer because it was a way that he could personally express how much he cared for other people in this life.
You know, we're taking a look at earlier pictures just in the last 45 minutes or so of the president's remains being loaded onto a blue truck that was then loaded onto Air Force One, as it's about 2.5 hours away from landing in D.C. now. We've gotten some ideas of what the coming days will bring, but one touching picture, and I wondered if you could talk about his health in the later years, because he had a service dog, Sully, and this picture has gone viral on the internet as it sat beneath his casket before it was loaded onto Air Force One today. Just your thoughts on his health and how he battled through it.
Well, you know, Uncle George and Aunt Barb, they always had dogs and animals around them. And there was Millie during the White House years. There was BB. And some of the dogs weren't as friendly as others. And Sully was President Bush's last dog and a service dog. And he always wanted to have dogs around him. And I think the dog reflects his compassion and his love and his caring. Clearly, I saw that picture that Jim McGrath tweeted out, and he was somebody that had such a wellspring of love for other people, and it was genuine love. I remember during his White House years, he went and eulogized a guy named Woodrow Willoughby, who was a White House elevator operator that most people didn't pay any attention or mind to. He went down to the Deep South and attended his funeral because he had really become family. I was able to be with him in 1992 when he went to the Houston Astrodome to deliver his speech for re-election as president and ride with him in the car. But that's not what I remember. What I remember is he wouldn't leave a room because a spouse of a staff member had cancer. And all his advisors were saying, you got to get in the car, you're going to be late to the speech. And he said, no, this is more important. That was George Bush. George Bush always cared about the other guy, putting the other guy first, giving credit to others before giving credit to himself. He really had to coax it out of him to have him talk about himself, because he was so unfailingly humble and gracious and selfless and kind that he really cared so much more about people than he ever did about politics.
Walker Stapleton, so good to get your perspective on all of that love that you shared with the former president and his final summer in Maine as well.
Truly
Appreciate
blessed.
You.
Thank you.
Truly blessed. And we're blessed to have you on the program. Thank you. I want to bring in now the former president's lasting impact and legacy conversation that I'm eager to have with Fox News chief political anchor and the anchor of Special Report, Bret Baier. Bret, great to see you. I know that you and Martha MacCallum will start the coverage, and as you go forward and we continue to memorialize and remember this former president, I want to look ahead at what will change in Washington, D.C. The civility that he was part of, can we bring that back?
That's a great question, Harris. I do think that this moment in time, when we see starting today the casket arriving here in Washington, the ceremony in the Rotunda, and then getting to Wednesday and the National Cathedral service, I think it will be a time to reflect. It'll be a time to remember. And my microphone just dropped off, but I'll put it back on.
Now we gotcha.
And it'll be a time to remember, a time to reflect, and also a time to perhaps say, you know, this is possible in reaching out across the aisle. We'll see, you know, how long that lasts. It's a different time now, and it's important to note that a lot has transpired in the way that politics runs. There will be a lot of people, I think, at the end of this week who say, man, this feels good to look back at that reaching across the aisle. It's good to see Republicans and Democrats come together to honor somebody. But most likely it'll go back to fighting the battles, even the financial ones, as we wait for another possible government shutdown.
Yeah, I was just reading, you know, Democrats now are saying that they want to push for a week instead of that 2-week extension. We'll see what happens. Reaching across the aisle, though, not just symbolic, but it was necessary for the former president, H.W. Bush, because he didn't have, you know, years leading up to that first midterm, a year and a half or whatever it's been, where he had bicameral leadership of the same party.
Well, that's right. And, you know, on the domestic side, he had a number of accomplishments. I guess you would say that his efforts to prevent a recession didn't work. There was a recession during that time. It cleared up before the election. But really the beneficiary of all of that was Bill Clinton. And he wins the election and goes on to preside over an economy that starts to boom, really, in essence. George H.W. Bush's biggest legacy, perhaps, is going to be on foreign policy and his ability to get the coalition in the first Gulf War, but also to handle that transition in fighting communism and after the wall falls down.
Since you mentioned coalitions, Matt Schlapp of CPAC and other various leadership positions in the Republican Party was just on with us on Outnumbered, and he said that you have a coalition right now within the Republican Party. It's kind of three-pronged. You've got conservatives, Republicans, and those who support President Trump. You didn't have anything like that in terms of, you know, a break apart within the party, but there were challenges even back then in the GOP for the former president.
Well, there were. And listen, Vice President Bush was not the first choice for Ronald Reagan. It was about bringing the party together. And, you know, they were opponents in the presidential election. As Vice President Bush becomes President Bush, there were still, you know, fractions that he had to bring together. And he was just a really adept at, you know, those personal notes, those handwritten notes. You just heard Walker talking about them. And he operated like that inside Washington. One quick story about just the former Soviet Union. Gorbachev, the wall falls down. Bush reaches out to Gorbachev and invites him to Camp David. And Gorbachev is weak at that point inside the Soviet Union. They go play horseshoes at Camp David, one of the favorite things George H.W. Bush liked to do. The first throw, Mikhail Gorbachev hits a ringer, and he gets very excited, never played before. Bush takes that horseshoe and at dinner presents him a mounted horseshoe, a plaque, saying, "Congratulations." Gorbachev was one of the first former leaders who's still alive to put out a statement after 41's death Friday night to say thank you for his service and sacrifice.
Yeah, horseshoe, probably a metaphor for politics as well, I would think, too.
Yeah.
Brett Baer, we will see you at 4:30 p.m. Eastern for the next time. I appreciate you being on the program.
Sure.
That's when Brett and Martha McCallum will anchor our special coverage of the ceremony in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, where George H.W. Bush will lie in state. Leaders of the House and Senate will pay their respects, and Vice President Pence is also scheduled to speak. Don't miss a second of it, 4:30 p.m. Eastern. And allies of President Trump are ramping up their criticism of special counsel Robert Mueller, calling his tactics in the Russia probe, quote, unethical. How will this play out now that Mueller has his written answers from the president's legal team?
This isn't a search for the truth. It's a witch hunt. This is what's wrong with these special prosecutors and independent counsels. They think they're God.
Fox News alert, a new headache for Robert Mueller as Jerome Corsi, a key figure in the Russia investigation, has filed a criminal complaint with Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker against the special counsel. It accuses his team of coercion tactics. This is President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, says Mueller has gone too far.
I think the special prosecutor has stepped over the line now with the way he's intimidating people in order to tell what he believes is his version of the truth. You can only exert a certain amount of pressure before it becomes unethical and destructive. This isn't a search for the truth. It's a witch hunt.
Well, so why did Michael Cohen, his former personal attorney, lie initially? CNN is reporting that happened because he thought the president would pardon him in exchange for his support under oath. Catherine Herridge, a lie, criminal.
Well, thank you, Harris. This morning on Twitter, the president said his former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, wants special treatment and misled the special counsel to cut his sentence. Quote, Michael Cohen asked judge for no prison time. He makes up stories to get an already reduced deal for himself and get his wife and father-in-law, who has money, off scot-free. He lied for this outcome and should, in my opinion, serve a full and complete sentence. This morning in Washington, conservative author Jerome Corsi filed this 78-page complaint against the special counsel, accusing investigators of bullying tactics to secure false testimony. It reads in part, Dr. Corsi has been criminally threatened and coerced to tell a lie and call it the truth, the complaint states, continuing that Mueller's office is now knowingly and deceitfully threatening to charge Dr. Corsi with an alleged false statement unless he gives them false testimony against himself, the president, Roger Stone, and others. On Fox last week, Corsi went even further.
The special prosecutors blow you up. They do this, what I call perjury trap. It's really, they ask you a question. They have material they won't show you. You've forgotten about it. They say, you just lied because this email you forgot about in 2016 proves your current memory is wrong. I mean, it's a memory test. And then they accuse you of lying.
With Cohen admitting he lied to Congress about the timeline of a Moscow real estate project, with the discussions ending in June 2016, not 5 months earlier in January, as he testified, Democrats are indicating they will focus in the new term on the money trail.
There is now testimony. There is now a witness who confirms that in the same way Michael Flynn was compromised, that the president and his business are compromised.
It's worth noting that the Democrats have really shifted their focus over the last year when it comes to the Russia investigation. First, allegations about George Papadopoulos, who was a one-time Trump campaign advisor, and his contacts over the Clinton emails, then to the dossier, and now it seems pretty firmly focused on the money trail once they take the gavel in January. Harris.
All right, Catherine, thank you very much. Going to bring in now Judge Andrew Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst. Judge, always great to get your expertise on these things. What matters most in all of this?
Whether or not the authorities to whom Jerome Corsi filed his complaint take it seriously. And I say that because almost everything that he has accused the prosecutors of doing is standard operating procedure for prosecutors.
Oh.
This is, as you and I have discussed off air, the dark side of law enforcement. It is not neat and it is not pretty. Prosecutors can coerce, they can threaten, they can lie, they can deceive, they can do anything short of actually committing a crime in order to extract evidence from a witness or in order to flip the witness to their side. And that's apparently what they've tried to do with Jerry Corsi.
All right, so that's Corsi. Let's move on to the president's personal attorney, Michael Cohen. You say what matters most with him is the 70 hours he spent with the FBI.
Right. A lot of our friends and colleagues have said, well, big deal, he admitted a lie and he corrected it in the courtroom. The important thing for our analysis is not what Michael Cohen said to the federal judge last Thursday. It's what he said to the FBI in the 70 hours that they debriefed him. That is an extraordinary amount of time for them to spend with him. What is also important is the timing. Michael Cohen's guilty plea coming 5 days after President Trump submits under oath his written answers to the special prosecutor. I'm going to suggest to you there must be a contradiction between the two. The timing could not have been a coincidence.
Rudy Giuliani says no, that those answers will hold. And in journalism, we call them evergreen.
Right. You know, Rudy has been very effective at persuading the public to believe. You know, you just had Schlapp on, who's taking polls on this.
Right, Max Schlapp at CPAC.
Matthew, right. And Rudy's been very effective at persuading the public that the indictment or impeachment of Donald Trump is untenable. That doesn't persuade a judge or a jury, but that does persuade the public, and that's what Rudy's been spending his time doing. He knows that the techniques that he's blasting are the same techniques he used when he was the chief federal prosecutor.
Well, maybe that's why he's so good at blasting it.
Yes.
Because he knows how to do it. But in all fairness, don't you kind of have to know what the other side is capable of based on your own experience?
Yes.
Otherwise, you can't help your client.
That's the value that Rudy that he brings to the president. He knows how the government operates.
Here is what is not basic to me, and that is now a new political drumbeat for this to be wrapped up. Is Mueller fettered by that? He's already said or indicated that the president wouldn't be indicted anyway. So is it okay for people to bang the drum and say wrap it up and for him to be fettered by it?
It's okay for people to say whatever they want, but it's not going to influence Mueller.
You don't think so?
I don't think so, because evidence does not come to you when you're the prosecutor in an orderly fashion, and it doesn't come to you signed, sealed, and delivered. You have to corroborate it, and those things take time.
Real quickly before I have to let you go, the idea of pardoning at that federal level, not problematic if the president wants to do it legally.
Pardoning who?
Whether it's Manafort or Cohen.
Right, well,
Cohen might not get it now, though.
The Manafort problem, the Manafort pardon would be problematic because at the time he pleaded guilty to federal charges for which the president can pardon him, he also admitted state crimes for which the president cannot pardon him.
Okay, so you get half but not the other. You and I have talked about that.
Yes.
So it lessens the sentence, perhaps.
Well, it would relieve Paul Manafort of some of the burden that he's facing with law enforcement, but not all of it.
All right. Judge, we'll bring you back, as we always do with those moments where you can make it all make sense.
Thank you, Harris.
Thank you. Remembering America's 41st president, his final resting place beside his beloved Barbara and their eldest daughter, Robin. America says farewell to George H.W. Bush. A live report from Texas next.
The last words George Bush ever said were, "I love you." And he said those words to 43, President George Bush 43, who had called in to say, "Dad, I love you."
Now on Air Force One on its way to Washington, about halfway through its flight, where he will lie in state ahead of a state funeral Wednesday at the National Cathedral. Then the remains will head back to his adopted home state of Texas, where the former president will be buried on Thursday on the grounds of his presidential library alongside his wife of 73 years, Barbara, who passed away just last April. Their daughter, Robin, also is buried there, died of cancer in 1953 as a little one. William LaJeunesse has more from the Bush Presidential Library in College Station, Texas. William?
Well, Harris, the schedule has the president returning to Texas on Wednesday evening. He will lie in repose at St. Martin's Episcopal Church, the family church, really, in Houston, Texas. We're not sure if that will be public or not. Then on Thursday morning, there'll be a service mostly for friends and family because of the size of that church. Then around 1 p.m., the president will be on a funeral train, bringing him here to College Station, Texas A&M University, site of the Presidential Library, and his final resting place. Now, Union Pacific painted the diesel locomotive in his honor to resemble Air Force One. Funeral trains were common in the 1900s. Abraham Lincoln's lasted 12 days. 20 miles an hour, 25 million Americans said their final goodbye. The last funeral train was Dwight D. Eisenhower from Washington to Kansas in 1969. Now, the Bush trip from Houston here to College Station will be about 2.5 hours. It will arrive here around 3:30 in the afternoon. There'll be, because he chose Texas A&M, partially because of the military history here. 4,000 cadets attend here. Thousands will line the route leading up to the library. Now, over the weekend, I spoke to many here, and they're using the president's passing as a teaching moment. They brought their children to understand the man and how his character shaped our history.
My son's with me, and I'll remember this weekend for a long time, and being in College Station. Well, they talked a lot about President Bush and what he was like, and we learned a lot about life and death this weekend. We talked a lot about that, and talked a lot about what kind of man he was and what kind of man I want him to be.
So something the president said that I saw inside the library that really stuck with me, I think that typifies his style, Harris. Quote, "Some see leadership as high drama, the sound of trumpets calling, but I see history as a book with many pages, and each day we fill a page with hope and meaning. A new breeze blows, a page turns, the story unfolds."
He's had such an incredible impact, not because he's a lecturer or because he, is trying to tell us how to behave, but because he led such an amazing life as a role model. He's probably the best man I know in terms of everything you would want in a man. He was a great husband, an amazing dad.
So there is a quiet, secluded area behind the presidential library. It is secured right now by the Secret Service. We can't go there, but that is the final resting place. Again, as you mentioned, next to Barbara Bush and their daughter, Robin, who died at age 3 in 1953 of leukemia. I will say this, Harris, there's a very intimate portrait inside here, but also this is the Bush School of Public Policy, and they hope to carry on his tradition of public service through many generations. Harris.
Absolutely. William, thank you very much. Bob Grady served as a speechwriter and policy advisor to Bush 41 during the 1988 presidential campaign and later served in the White House. Bob, it is fabulous to see you today. And, so much of when we talk about the former president has been about celebration. And while there is heartache in his passing, what will be celebrated maybe even around the world from his accomplishments?
Well, thank you for having me on. I think his life will be remembered as that of a great man, but also as a great example for us all, because he really showed us how to live a life of service. And, he was not only a great statesman in terms of, building an international coalition to liberate Kuwait, in terms of managing with great and very deft hand the dissolution of the Soviet Union, but he was competitive too. He showed grace under pressure when he won, grace when he lost, but also he liked to win. And you don't get to be president of the United States without having that competitive edge. And he ran hard, and as you know, won in 1988.
Well, and you had that first row seat for that competitiveness. Tell us about it.
Well, it's interesting. People forget this, but on August 1st of 1988. President Bush was down by 17 points. Then Vice President Bush was down 17 points to Michael Dukakis. And Time magazine was already writing stories about what the Dukakis presidency was going to be like. And some of that team was maybe measuring the drapes in the White House a little too early. But I think the president really figured out that it was about what direction the country was going to go in. And he really struck a chord by being very conservative on taxes, conservative on national security, conservative on crime, perhaps being a little more to the center, if you will, on environmental protection and education and child care and some other areas. And that resonated very well with the American voter. If you remember, he won 426 electoral votes and was the last Republican to win states like California, New Jersey, Illinois, some other states with big suburban populations. So he got out there and worked very hard, did a great job on his acceptance speech that year, And, you know, we were traveling to 4, 5, sometimes 6 states a day for that last couple months of that '88 election.
Yeah, and he was known for his incredible energy. I know.
Oh,
it's,
yeah.
Yeah, I
he
mean,
liked
his
to play
military.
about 5 sports a day.
Well, but even on the campaign trail, I'm sure that helped, or maybe was on full display.
He liked to turn everything into a game. You could be playing horseshoes with him. You could be playing cards on Air Force 2 or later Air Force 1. You could just, anything. He liked to have a little competition. Who was going to get, you know, who was going to win the little mini game. And he had all kinds of great little nicknames for people and you know, fun competitions all the time, both at Kennebunkport and at the White House and elsewhere.
Bob Grady, a former advisor for the former president's 1988 presidential campaign. Thanks for that history lesson on August 1st, because you're right, we had forgotten that huge gap that he had losing at the time to Michael Dukakis. But don't hang those drapes too soon, you said. Great to see you today. Thank you for your memories.
Thanks, Harris. Thanks for having me.
Sure. We'll have much more on the life and legacy of the former president, George H.W. Bush. Plus, former FBI Director James Comey is set for that closed-door hearing with the House Judiciary Committee. After coming to an agreement with Republican lawmakers, what do they hope to find out? Next, a member of that very committee will join me. Former FBI Director James Comey is now set to testify behind closed doors before the House Judiciary Committee later this week, after reaching a deal with Republican lawmakers and dropping his challenge against a House subpoena. Here's what Comey tweeted. Grateful for a fair hearing from judge, hard to protect my rights without being in contempt, which I don't believe in, so we'll sit down in the dark. But Republicans agree I'm free to talk when done, and transcript released in 24 hours. This is the closest I can get to public testimony. Let's bring in Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, a member of the House Judiciary Committee. So it sounds like he's selling this as, well, it's important for everybody to know what I said, so we got to only do this in public. Is that fair?
I'm all for doing things in public. Let's remember this is the same James Comey who lied to Congress in public about the status of the investigation into Donald Trump. It's the same James Comey who leaked information to his Columbia law professor friend in order to influence an ongoing investigation. And then it's the same James Comey who totally left the chain of command, and not according to me or House Republicans, but according to the Democrat Obama-appointed Inspector General. He totally departed from the protocols and procedures that are supposed to create some integrity and objectivity in this process as it related to Hillary Clinton's emails. But here's the real travesty, Harris. It was 5 months ago that Devin Nunes gave the House Judiciary Committee 42 names where we needed to take interviews. But we moved at such a snail's pace that now we only have days left in the legislative calendar, and we're only now getting to James Comey. What a joke. This low energy oversight is one of the reasons I think we lost the majority.
Wow, low energy oversight, but it was oversight by your political team. What happened?
We didn't move fast enough. There were those in the Republican majority, like Devin Nunes and Jim Jordan and myself and Mark Meadows, who were begging the Speaker and the Judiciary Chairman and the Oversight Chairman to schedule the interviews, to get the information out, do it in public. I don't think that we really wanted the answers to a lot of these questions. I think that a lot of the Republican leadership viewed the Russia investigation and our oversight into the FBI's conduct as disruptive to the economic message that they were trying to push. What we saw in the election is that the economic message alone is not going to deliver the type of turnout we need to win in suburban America. We need to show people that we're actually doing our job, and I just think the low productivity from our committee. I mean, Harris, what do you think is really going to happen? We get James Comey in at the end of the week, and then we got a few legislative days left. I mean, what are we going to do? Hold him in contempt? I mean, I think it really is indicative of a slow calendar. It's interesting. I mean, and in some ways, even he could see that, because it prolongs things for him as well. So you do this, and by the way, that was an incredible level of transparency. If you don't get invited to any cocktail parties this holiday season, you can come to my house. Thank you. I can read your awesome new book. God bless you. So a great Christmas present, I would think. Thank you. So as we look forward, though, and you have that 24-hour space between the hearing and then the release of the transcript, does that also give you an opportunity, if they're classified? Because I really want to kind of dial down to what you expect to get from James Comey. Do you think he's going to hand you classified information? What do you want to know? I think that we're trying to understand what was infected by this philosophy that Comey had, that you could go and leak things to the media to obtain a political outcome in a criminal or counterintelligence investigation. We've seen now, even after the departure of Comey, other people who thought that it was okay or appropriate to leak to the media. And so I think really understanding the four corners of those leaks and that culture is really important. And then also understanding, kind of the breaking of the chain of command and who was involved in that decision. We've seen text messages that relate figures in the Obama White House to some of those decisions, and I think we want to peel back a few more layers of that onion. But even if we get the facts, we're out of time to really do the job that we should have been doing for the last 2 years.
So that was my next question, and you've already answered it. That is, once you get all this information, what then does accountability look like? And now you've got to work across the aisle to try to get that done, the political aisle. Congressman Matt Gaetz, always great to see you from Florida, and if you read that, I'll sign it for you. Bless you.
Oh, thank you, Harris.
The nation preparing to say a final farewell now to our 41st president. We continue to honor the life and legacy of George H.W. Bush. Coverage throughout the day. Keep watching. Plus, the U.S. and China are calling a temporary truce, a ceasefire on trade as negotiating continues. The president also signed a revamped NAFTA deal with Mexico and Canada, his USMCA. So was this a successful G20 summit for the president? Some say yes. Power panel next. For $5 billion to fund the border wall system, the president tweeted this: "We would save billions of dollars if the Democrats would give us the votes to build the wall. Either way, people will not be allowed into our country illegally!" Exclamation point. "We will close the entire southern border if necessary. Also, stop the drugs." So my big question, and I'm so glad you're here, why haven't, up until now, Republicans helped this president get the funding for his wall? We can blame Democrats all you want, but you had a situation where he didn't get the votes among those Republicans, even in the House.
Yeah, this shouldn't be shocking news, but there's a lot of Republicans who've been in Congress a long time who view the Donald Trump agenda as a bit of an indictment on their failure to solve problems. And one of the things that's happening on funding of the border wall is a lot of folks believe that they're either not for the wall or they don't want to admit the fact that our immigration policy in the southern border has been a complete failure.
And let me get this straight. So they want to fail twice then?
Yeah.
So they failed and they didn't get it done, and now they don't want to push forward, because you could do like a deal with DACA. I mean, you could, there was some room.
There's a deal to be had if Democrats want to actually give Donald Trump something to sign, but he does have problems within his own party. It's a very fair question.
But see, I think that's where the deal is to be had, because there is something that both sides want. There's a lot that both sides can't live with. They have to give and take, but I think he has a better chance with Democrats. It's the Republicans.
Why
I agree with you. Who failed him.
Because we're having a change in the coalition in politics. Sometimes, they call it, that there's a new group and a new way of looking at politics. And the Republican Party as a monolith, I now think we have a conservative community, a Republican community, and a Trump community. There's mostly overlap, but not complete overlap. And it's a lot of change, makes a lot of people uncomfortable. I'm good with it because I think we need to change.
I think it's fantastic because I think this two-party system, it is so outdated.
Fossilized.
And it serves almost no one. And the president is really the first president who's realizing that things are broken up into coalitions. He had Jeff Sessions as his attorney general, but he was also talking about, pretty radical criminal justice reform at the same time, which is also a darling subject of progressives. So if you can take these coalitions in areas where you need them.
That's a great point.
Instead of just us versus them, one team versus the other, Northwestern versus Ohio State.
Woo! Right.
And the Buckeyes won that game. Thank you for bringing that up.
Oh, my goodness. But yeah, I mean, I see you nodding along as Kennedy and Matt are talking, and I totally get why we're at the point now where the president might be on the precipice of a deal with Democrats. The big question is, how do they want to define their legacy on immigration? Because it isn't just Republicans who've done not more than they should or what they could. Democrats are guilty too. They had a supermajority and couldn't get it done.
Both sides have gone to the extremes on immigration. And I think that my party, the Democrats, are right now also going through some conversations about how they want to lead the House. And we have the progressives that won in this election, and there are many of them who have certain feelings on immigration. But a lot of the reason Democrats took the majority were moderates from places like the suburbs of conservative cities, from the Midwest, Michigan, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Kansas. You can go around the country. These are not abolish ICE Democrats. So we're doing some own figuring out in our own party here. I do think Democrats will support a 2-week stopgap measure to push funding of the government right up to Christmas. But if we're sitting here in 2 weeks and everyone wants to go home for Christmas,
anybody?
Well, no one wants to fight over it this week, which I understand.
So why don't they make a deal then? If they don't want to fight, why don't they sit down like adults and make a deal?
Because Congress,
it's Congress.
Because Congress is so dysfunctional. The only time you'll ever see a deal is when they are absolutely have their back to, unfortunately,
but this is
the wall.
But this is it. I mean, this is it. Republicans are now not going to control the House. How much more against the wall can you get?
Well, look, I think the president is serious about wanting his $5 billion, but what he's more serious than anything for the wall, what he's more serious